or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 16th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: Stripe and buyout firm Advent International made a joint takeover bid for PayPal in a deal that would value the fintech company at around $53 billion. JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, and the 5 biggest banks on Wall Street are on pace to have their best trading years ever after a second quarter boom in activity. The S&P 500 rose Wednesday, gaining 0.4%. The Nasdaq was 0.6% higher, and the Dow added 0.3%. Warren Buffett didn't donate this year to the Gates Foundation, ending a 2-decade run in which the famed investor gifted Berkshire Hathaway shares to the philanthropy. The global economy has less capacity to cushion the blow from a reduction in energy supplies moving through the Strait of Hormuz as the U.S. and Iran resume hostilities, the IMF said. China's AI heavyweight, DeepSeek, is preparing for an IPO as early as the second quarter of next year to bankroll its costly research and fuel growth. United Airlines raised its annual profit outlook on the back of strong revenue trends that are easing the pain of volatile fuel prices. Johnson & Johnson raised its forecast for the year after recording higher sales in the latest quarter, helped by strength in several of its cancer drugs. SpaceX shares traded below their $135 IPO price for the first time, a sign of waning enthusiasm. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. Trump is leaning toward expanding U.S. military operations in Iran after days of briefings from top aides. Todd Blanche, who is seeking confirmation as Attorney General, told a Senate panel that a $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund, which critics saw as a money pot for Trump's allies, is dead. Trump said ICE officers should continue using traffic stops to arrest immigrants after he was caught off guard by an agency decision to halt most such stops. The Trump administration is considering placing a bond of $100,000 on some green card seekers applying at U.S. consulates abroad. Goldman Sachs lawyer Catherine Remler was grilled by members of Congress over her correspondence with sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Dr. Erica Schwartz, Trump's nominee to lead the CDC, promised to uphold unwavering scientific integrity at the agency during her Senate confirmation hearing. Ukraine Zelensky ousted his defense minister, who drew support for his efforts to promote modern technology to outsmart Russia. The U.S. Air Force, for the first time, successfully fired an air-to-air missile from a new jet-powered combat drone built by Anduril. Argentina will meet Spain in the World Cup final on Sunday after scoring a 2-1 win against England. A former Fed official was sentenced to more than 3 years in prison for lying to investigators about sharing confidential information outside of the central bank. China enacted rules forbidding chatbots designed for companionship from encouraging emotional reliance. Technology and staffing issues at Newark Airport threaten to disrupt travel in the New York City area in the months ahead. Died Pat Oliphant, 90, political cartoonist. The picture on today's front page is of Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche testifying before a Senate panel as he tries to secure the job permanently. And that headline, Blanche gets drilled by senators on payout fund, Trump IRS deal. Attorney General Pick faces questions over status of the IRS agreement, by Sadie Gurman and Richard Rubin, Washington. Todd Blanche tried to ease concerns over a settlement between President Trump and the Internal Revenue Service that has become a sticking point for key Republican senators whose support he needs to be confirmed as Attorney General. Blanche said that a $1.8 billion so-called anti-weaponization fund, which critics saw as a money pot for Trump allies, is dead, and that the Justice Department would accept legislation to prevent its resurrection. It is a moot issue, Blanche, now the acting Attorney General, told senators Wednesday during his confirmation hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee. The weaponization fund is dead. It is not moving forward. Emerging from the hearing room, Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, said he wasn't persuaded. The argument was that the weaponization fund is dead, and what he confirmed is that it's not, he said. Trump named Blanche acting Attorney General in April after firing Pam Bondi. Since then, Blanche has moved quickly, taking steps that have pleased the president and mollified some right-wing critics. The fund and a related order Blanche signed giving Trump, a Republican, sweeping legal protections from government actions have remained a potential hurdle for Senators Cornyn and Tom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, who haven't promised Blanche their votes. A defection by either would leave the committee deadlocked and keep Blanche from advancing to a full Senate vote needed to secure the job permanently. I want to stick a fork in this turkey, said Tillis, referring to the fund. He has said he wants to vote for Blanche, but wouldn't do so unless he gets a vote on legislation that would end the fund for good. Tillis later said that he wanted Trump to endorse legislation killing the fund as a way to get Republicans on board. Blanche said the Justice Department would help lawmakers write it We do not object to that path, he said. The president has not agreed in writing to delete the weaponization fund, Cornyn said during the hearing. Sitting before a blown-up poster-sized copy of the order, highlighting his concerns with a long pointer. I suppose they could bring a lawsuit and we would litigate it, Blanche said, but even if we were litigating it, there's no fund, and the results of such litigation would not be the revival of the fund. Other articles from the front page follow. Big stock sales risk imperiling the bull market. Race to issue shares reminds some of later stages of dot-com and other rallies, by Gregory Zuckerman. The rush for cash by some of the world's largest companies is placing the long bull market at risk. SpaceX's record, $75 billion public offering, Alphabet's $85 billion equity raise, a $26 billion plus sale of American depository receipts from the South Korean chip-making company SK Hynix. Investors have been cheering the raging bull market for years, 3 years and 9 months to be precise, with the S&P 500 having more than doubled during that period. Now companies are racing to take advantage, raising concern that the party could be coming to an end. Markets don't collapse because of old age. Even high prices aren't usually enough alone to cripple a bull. But one way stocks can slow is when new issuance overwhelms investors as supply outstrips demand. Companies raced to sell shares in late 1999 and the first half of 2000, for example, which some believe contributed to the dot-com collapse. That is why some investors are wary of the recent rush of stock and bond issuance, as well as a slowdown in the stock buybacks. Already this year, $344.7 billion of new shares were sold to investors, more than the full year's totals in 2025, 2024, 2023, and 2022, according to Deal Logic, which includes public offerings, follow-ons, and convertible bonds in its totals. Stock issuance tends to surge in the late stages of a bull market, said Rob Arnott, chair of research affiliates. The pace of issuance is picking up. Last month, SpaceX went public in the biggest ever initial public offering. On Friday, SK Hynix's U.S. listing marked the largest ever share sale by a non-American company. More issuance is on the way, with the artificial intelligence developer Anthropic and others planning to go public. And fewer companies are buying back shares, another way the overall supply of shares is swelling. Overall, U.S. companies will issue a net $500 billion of equities over the next year, compared with a net reduction of $1 trillion in recent years, mostly from stock buybacks, according to Elm Wealth, an advisory firm. A surge of share sales doesn't guarantee a stock slump, of course. Comparable issuance took place in 2021 as investors hoovered up shares of special purpose acquisition companies known as SPACs, SPACs. Many of those deals ran into problems, costing investors big money. though the S&P 500 shook the concerns off, soaring 27% in 2021. But a surge of stock sales is sometimes witnessed near the end of bull markets as companies take advantage of investor exuberance. Some veterans said a surge in stock issuance, along with fewer stock buybacks, shouldn't worry investors too much, partly because they have a marginal impact on the overall market supply and demand. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. President is leaning to escalation in Iran by Alexander Ward and Lawrence Norman, Washington. President Trump is leaning toward expanding U.S. military operations in Iran after days of briefings from top aides, U.S. officials said. Options include stepping up airstrikes, sending ground forces to seize Iranian islands near the Strait of Hormuz, and bombing a fortified site that could be used for covert nuclear work. Trump hosted a Situation Room meeting Tuesday evening to discuss the potential seizure of Karg Island and other territory along the strait using U.S. troops, as well as the potential bombing of a tunnel complex at Pickaxe Mountain, a nuclear-linked site the U.S. has yet to target. Expanding airstrikes against more targets in Iran, including energy sites, also remains a possibility. The discussion was one of multiple formal and informal conversations Trump has held in recent days with senior officials, including Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the officials said. The president hasn't made a decision on next steps in the war, officials said, and insists privately and publicly that he would prefer resolving his dispute with Iran diplomatically. But Iran hasn't capitulated to Trump's demands that it surrender its nuclear stockpile after weeks of military strikes and an interim deal that would have allowed Tehran to make billions of dollars selling oil on the open market. The diplomatic gridlock has prompted Trump to ask aides for new escalatory options that could force Iran to surrender, or at least promise to stop attacking commercial vessels in the strait. Some U.S. officials said Trump, a Republican, is reluctant to commit ground forces. He has repeatedly walked back his biggest public threats, including taking Karg Island and Iran's oil industry. But if Trump were to approve of the plans, it would usher in the most dangerous phase of the nearly 5-month war and drag the U.S. deeper into a growing Middle East conflict, one that would likely lead to higher gas prices and complicate Republicans' plans for the midterms. The U.S. military said it launched 2 waves of airstrikes against Iran on Wednesday, targeting Iran's ability to threaten vessels transiting the strait. We'll find out whether or not we settle with them or we just finish it off, Trump said shortly after the second wave of attacks. The military also has been enforcing a U.S. blockade of Iranian ports, turning away several ships from the coast on Wednesday. The strikes on Wednesday marked the 5th straight day of attacks on Iran, following the collapse of an interim peace agreement that had lifted the U.S. blockade on Iranian ports and paused sanctions on Tehran's oil sales. But Trump declared the ceasefire over after Iran attacked ships in the strait, reimposing the blockade and authorizing fresh strikes. A green light on either a Pickaxe Mountain or Karg Island operation would be Trump's riskiest bet of the conflict. AI anger has tech executives fearing for their lives, by Lindsay Ellis, Susha Ellison, and Tina Lee, San Francisco. A security guard at Anthropic rushed to stop the man sneaking into the lobby of the world's most valuable AI startup. The man had entered by following closely behind a badge-swiping employee. He showed the guard an envelope marked with the name of a top Anthropic executive. The executive was going to be killed, he told the guard, and he needed to warn them, according to records of the April 15th incident obtained by the Wall Street Journal. The encounter, which took place 5 days after an attempted firebombing of OpenAI chief executive Sam Altman's house, ended without violence or an arrest. But for executives at Anthropic and across the AI industry, the threat was far from past. In recent months, a gathering storm of opposition to AI has given rise to a surge of violent rhetoric, threats against people and property, and a serious attempt at harm. The phenomenon has executives at tech companies, large and small, reconsidering their personal security arrangements and how they talk about their products to a public that is increasingly wary of the technology and the societal changes it is ushering in. Police in San Francisco have responded to multiple threats against employees of Anthropic and OpenAI, according to records reviewed by the Journal. Pressure builds over Israel's treatment of Palestinian inmates. Reports and interviews detail alleged violence, medical neglect, and starvation. By Felice Solomon and Anat Peled. As Hamas fighters swarmed into Israel on October 7, 2023, the power suddenly went out in a remote prison in the Negev desert. When the lights briefly came back on a few hours later, a new era of hard-line policies had begun. In the wake of Hamas's attack, which left some 1,200 people in Israel dead and around 250 as hostages, the thousands of Palestinians held at the Lavi prison in Negev and other prisons across Israel now faced harsher conditions. Thousands more joined them, swept up in raids amid the ensuing war. Auditors from Israel's Ministry of Justice and United Nations agencies later found that detainees were subjected to beatings, particularly during transfers and searches, and starvation. Autopsies of some Palestinians who died in custody showed signs of physical assault, medical neglect, and malnutrition. Doctors and rights groups described instances of sexual violence. In addition to those reports, the Wall Street Journal interviewed a dozen Palestinians released from Israeli prisons since 2024, mostly as part of ceasefire agreements with Hamas, a U.S.-designated terrorist organization. All said they experienced physical abuse, such as being bound in stress positions and beaten, and severe hunger. 2 men said they were sexually assaulted in front of other prisoners. Government officials in Israel have said they intentionally made life harder for detainees after October 7th, including reducing food rations and banning visits from the International Committee of the Red Cross, which are standard in conflicts around the world. The changes were designed to toughen punishments for terrorists and enhance deterrence against extremism, some officials have said. They say basic standards of care are met and deny allegations of systematic abuses. Trump Gold Coin Set to Become Reality by Garrett Vipers and Richard Rubin. President Trump has added his name or likeness to federal buildings, an airport, bridges, and even some passports. Now the U.S. Mint is striking a $1 coin featuring his face in a rare and controversial move to put a sitting president on American money. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent unveiled designs for the new gold coin on Wednesday, which showed Trump's full-face image on the front next to the words, "In God We Trust," and a 1776 to 2026 inscription. It won't include any gold or precious metals, but will have a gold-like finish, said a Treasury Department spokeswoman. Buffett, Gates are still donating fortunes, but just not together. By Crystal Herr and Emily Glazer. Warren Buffett and Bill Gates made headlines decades ago when 2 of the world's richest men pledged to give away the bulk of their fortunes. After tens of billions of dollars in donations, both men are still promising to give billions more away. They just aren't doing it together. Buffett didn't donate this year to the Gates Foundation, ending a 2-decade run in which the famed investor gifted Berkshire Hathaway shares to the philanthropy. Instead, the 95-year-old donated to 4 Buffett family foundations and said he plans for all his Berkshire shares, currently worth about $140 billion, to be donated to those groups by the end of 2034. Buff said his decision to no longer give to the Gates Foundation wasn't based on a souring of his relationship with Gates or revelations relating to Gates' ties with Jeffrey Epstein. While it's distasteful, while he made mistakes, I made mistakes in hiring all kinds of people or choosing friends, Buffett said on CNBC Wednesday, adding that Gates had recently visited him in Omaha to discuss the donations and that the Microsoft co-founder has already proposed another meetup. No one bats 1,000 in the business of choosing people. The Wall Street Journal reported last month that Buffett was skipping his typical mid-year donation to the Gates Foundation to wait to see the findings of a review into the foundation's ties to Epstein. Gates has pledged the bulk of his Microsoft fortune to the foundation, which he said will close its doors in 2045. In a statement, the Gates Foundation said it was grateful to Buffett for his more than $47 billion in donations. The foundation continues from a position of financial strength to advance our work through 2045, supported by Bill's $200 billion commitment, it said. The move marks a new chapter in the relationship between two of the world's richest men. Buffett and Gates have been close friends for decades and launched the Giving Pledge with Melinda French Gates, aimed at getting the world's richest people to give away their wealth. It's been a wonderful friendship, Buffett said Wednesday. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Democrats block U.S. security. Schumer's senators are obstructing vital defense and intelligence bills. Do Senate Democrats care more about opposing President Trump than protecting national security? That's certainly what it looks like as they obstruct bill after bill to safeguard the homeland and defend against enemies. Their latest damaging act of resistance came Tuesday when they blocked the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, from advancing. The annual Defense Reauthorization Bill has long moved with bipartisan support. This year's $1.1 trillion policy outline includes raises for the troops, investments in missile defense, and multi-year procurement contracts to promote certainty for weapons makers and service chefs. It also includes many Democratic priorities, such as expanding child care access for military families. The bill advanced out of the Senate Armed Services Committee last month on an 18-9 vote. This bipartisan NDAA strengthens national defense and enhances oversight and accountability. It forces the Secretary to be more accountable to Congress and will prevent many errors of the past from being repeated in the future, Ranking Democrat Jack Reed said. So much for that. On Tuesday, Senate Democrats locked arms to prevent the bill from proceeding to a floor vote, ostensibly to protest the president's resumption of fighting with Iran. The White House has formally notified Congress that hostilities have resumed, that American strikes are underway again, and our forces remain positioned for more, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy called the defense bill an authorization for the Iran war. Do Democrats think the U.S. should do nothing while Iran fires at ships and American bases in the region? Do they plan to hold the defense bill hostage as long as Iran threatens to hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage? Iran and America's other adversaries must be pleased at this Democratic blockade against U.S. security. Mr. Schumer even suggested his party wouldn't back the defense bill unless Republicans agreed to much more domestic spending. He lambasted the NDAA as a lopsided proposal that shuts down bipartisan input and would shortchange families. Lopsided describes the spending bills that Democrats passed during the Biden years. Between 2019 and 2025, defense spending increased by $216 billion, while discretionary non-defense spending rose $318 billion. The latter doesn't include so-called mandatory programs like Medicaid, Obamacare subsidies, and student loans that make up most of the federal budget and grow on autopilot. Mr. Schumer's real goal here is blocking nearly everything to deny Republicans pre election achievements, no matter the consequences for U.S. security. This is a pattern. Recall how Senate Democrats kept the Department of Homeland Security, which includes the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, Coast Guard, and Secret Service, shut for 11 weeks this spring. Democrats refused to fund DHS unless Republicans agreed to measures that would hamstring immigration and customs enforcement. After their stand became untenable, they agreed to fund most of DHS aside from ICE and Customs and Border Protection. Republicans then used budget reconciliation to fund the latter for 3 years without requiring 60 votes in the Senate. Then, last month, Democrats blocked a reauthorization of the FISA Section 702 Foreign Surveillance Authorities in protest of Mr. Trump's appointment of housing regulator Bill Pulte as the acting director of national intelligence until his permanent nominee, Jay Clayton, is confirmed. Mr. Pulte was a lousy choice for many reasons, but letting a crucial national security tool expire, especially when the U.S. is at war, to protest Mr. Pulte is childish and self-serving partisanship. Mr. Schumer is always looking over his left shoulder at a primary challenge from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rather than on American security. He may figure voters will blame the administration if there's an attack on the homeland. The opinion polls suggest Democrats will gain seats in Congress this year and maybe win both the Senate and House. But the more they show they care very little for U.S. security, the more voters may conclude that would be a historic mistake. Lindsey Graham's plan to pressure Russia. His sanctions bill would make it harder for Putin to fund the Ukraine war. Lindsey Graham spent some of his last hours in life in Kyiv in support of Ukraine's defense against Vladimir Putin's war of aggression. So it's a fitting tribute to the late Republican senator that Congress is now preparing to take up his long-pending Russia sanctions and tariffs bill. The legislation seeks to push Mr. Putin toward peace by increasing the pressure on the Russian economy and making it tougher for the Kremlin to finance the war. As of Wednesday, at least 56 senators had signed on as co-sponsors, with more expected. An updated text was released late Tuesday and could go to the floor soon. Mr. Putin depends on energy revenue to pay for weapons and paying families of soldiers killed in his meat grinder. One credible estimate is that Russia had 38,000 casualties in June alone in Ukraine. The legislation would grant the U.S. president explicit authority to impose tariffs of up to 100% on the top 5 countries buying Russian oil and gas. An earlier version envisioned tariffs of 500% or more, and the new iteration limits the number of countries that could be subject to these duties. There's also an exemption for countries whose purchases account for less than 15% of Russia's total annual natural gas exports, provided they're making a substantial effort to wean off Russian energy. China and India likely won't qualify for exemptions. The legislation also targets the shadow fleet that Moscow uses to transport illicit energy sales. More Russian vessels would face mandatory sanctions. The U.S. would also go after the shadow fleet's foreign enablers from the ports where those vessels dock to the companies that offer supplies and maintenance to its corporate and financial providers. Weakening Russia's shadow fleet would strengthen Western security. Russian vessels have dragged anchors that have damaged undersea cables and pipelines in the Baltic Sea. A new report from the London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies lays out the evidence that the Kremlin has used the shadow fleet to launch drones and survey NATO military sites and other sensitive locations in Europe. The legislation would also impose more mandatory sanctions on Russian politicians, military leaders, oligarchs, and their families, as well as state-owned enterprises, financial institutions, and energy projects. Ditto for the foreign supporters of Russia's defense industrial base. Americans would be prohibited from making new investments in Russia and its energy industry or buying Russian sovereign debt. The president would have the authority to issue tariff and sanctions waivers if he deems it in the national interest. This could be a weakness given Mr. Trump's record of trying to placate Mr. Putin. But that was no doubt the price of getting Mr. Trump to support the bill. The timing of this legislation will get Mr. Putin's attention. Ukraine has wrapped up long-range strikes on military, energy, and export sites. And last week, Russia banned diesel exports through July 31st amid domestic shortages. Mr. Trump has also recently expressed more support for Ukraine as it has turned the battlefield tide, and thanks to Graham's persuasion. The fastest way to end this war is to make it too costly for Mr. Putin to continue. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages, who has the midterm upper hand? The party out of the White House usually picks up seats, but it isn't a sure thing. By Karl Rove. While a few primaries are still ahead, each party's fall lineup is coming into focus. Republicans should have 4 things going for them, Democrats 5. The first Republican advantage is the political map. The 35 Senate seats up this year, including 2 special elections, are mostly in southern, Midwestern, and Rocky Mountain states where Democrats are weak. To hold their majority, Republicans must defend incumbents in Maine, Ohio, and Alaska, and hold on to open seats in North Carolina, Texas, and Iowa. The likelihood of Democrats grabbing the 4 seats they need to take control of the Senate is slim, especially with GOP pickup opportunities in Michigan and New Hampshire. Second, mid-decade redistricting. Republicans hold a slender 218 to 212 majority with 1 independent and 4 vacancies. But in late June, the Cook Political Report projected that Democrats will need to win more than a dozen toss-up seats to take even a one-seat majority. According to Cook, 181 seats are solidly Democratic, while another 23 are likely Democratic or leaning that way. 186 are solidly Republican, while 26 are likely or lean GOP. That leaves 18 toss-ups, at least 14 of which Democrats have to win to take the House. Democrats could well flip the House, but this won't be 2018 when Democrats gained 41 House seats, much less the reverse of the 63-seat Republican gain in 2010. Money is the third GOP advantage. Republican groups have lots more than the Democrats do. The GOP Senate Super PAC has $238 million in cash on hand. Its Democratic counterpart, $126 million. As of the end of March, the Republican National Committee had $116 million on hand, while the Democratic National Committee had $13.8 million and $18 million in debt. The big question: will President Trump spend his mega super PAC's $350 million or hold it for his library? Fourth, the public's low opinion of the Democratic Party. In the Real Clear Politics average, the party gets only a 38.1% favorable rating, lower than the GOP's 39.3% or Mr. Trump's 41.1%. The Democrats' proclivity for extreme leftism, a June Pew poll found that 1/3 of Democrats like politicians who identify as Democratic Socialist, could make things harder for the party in battleground races. Republicans' fifth advantage should be messaging, since they have the White House, the largest political megaphone. But this president is notoriously undisciplined. Witness this week's quick come and gone 20% Strait of Hormuz cargo protection fee, and reports that he will make Thursday's national address a rant on the 2020 election. The first of the Democrats' 5 advantages is that it's a midterm. The party that doesn't hold the White House has made gains in all but 3 midterms since 1900. Very popular presidents kept the out party from gaining seats in 1934, 1998, and 2002. The second is Mr. Trump's dismal 56.1% disapproval rating, putting him upside down by 15 points. This is a consistent problem for him. His popularity has been declining since May 2025. Third, Mr. Trump's approval rating is particularly low on the economy at 36.4%. The economy is almost always voters' number 1 issue. Fourth, the generic ballot favors Democrats with 48.1% in the RCP average to 43.1% for Republicans. This is a lower advantage by a couple of points than what Democrats had in May, but it's still sufficient to carry the day. Fifth is the enthusiasm gap. Virtually every poll shows Democrats more fired up than Republicans. GOP voters tend to be older and thus more likely to turn out even when unenthusiastic. But enthusiasm will help the Democrats. These various advantages on each party won't be totally predictive. The strengths and weaknesses of individual candidates will matter too. A Republican campaign may prevail with better strategy and strong fundraising, organization, and voter targeting, or a candidate who convinces swing voters he has a vision for the economy. A Democrat may lose by being too ideologically extreme for his state or district, or because the Republican seems more authentic, approachable, hardworking, and caring. Candidates who shine in these areas can outrun their party, providing victory in races that the fundamentals suggest should be losers. Given the stakes, that's why this midterm election is so interesting and consequential. Democrats fall for socialism again. The party's rage against Trump strengthens the millennial Jacobins who don't share its interests. By Matthew Continetti. Don't tell Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that the Democratic Party's march toward socialism will hurt its chances this fall. Quote, I feel like it's deja vu all over again, she said last month, as socialist candidates swept primaries in deep blue congressional districts. There was so much fear around that when I was elected, and none of it bore out to be true. None of it? AOC has a fuzzy memory. Her brand of socialism, which takes its cues from Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and Democratic Socialist of America, might not have hurt her election chances or stopped Democrats from winning the House 8 years ago. But most Democrats acknowledge that the socialist agenda was a liability in 2020 and 2024. And as Democrats embrace socialism again, they're giving Republicans a potent message in 2026 and beyond. Individual socialists, Miss Ocasio-Cortez, Mr. Sanders, New York Mayor Zoran Mandani, are popular, especially among Democrats. But their charisma doesn't extend to socialist policies or the DSA itself. Successful conservatives will seize on this distinction between personality and principle and remind voters of socialism's perverse incentives and desolate results. Take healthcare. Socialists such as Michigan's Abdul El-Sayed have revived the idea of Medicare for All, which would replace the current healthcare system with government-run single-payer insurance. Voters seem open to Medicare for All in the abstract. They flinch as soon as they learn of its cost. And there are many. Medicare for All would be incredibly expensive. It would require crushing taxes on the middle class. It would eliminate most forms of private health insurance, affecting more than 200 million Americans on employer-provided plans, individual plans, and Medicare Advantage. Most Americans are satisfied with their health insurance. They don't want to lose it. Why let socialists take it from them? The same rule applies to immigration. The DSA calls for demilitarizing, example, opening the border, giving amnesty to every illegal immigrant, and ending immigration controls, detention, and deportations. That is not meeting voters where they are, it's running in the opposite direction. Voters are critical of immigration and customs enforcement and open to reforming it, but they haven't abandoned immigration enforcement. In an April poll by the left-leaning Center for American Progress and Blue Rose Research, 61% of voters agreed that illegal immigration is a big problem and supported stronger border security. A May Harris poll show that 80% of registered voters, including 71% of Democrats, support deporting illegal immigrants who have committed crimes. Immigration was President Trump's strongest issue. Socialists are also at odds with the public on energy. The Green New Deal, frankly, is a floor now, not a ceiling, for what we need to actually be looking at doing. Melette Quiros, who defeated a 15-term House incumbent in a Colorado primary last month, said recently. Her remarks echo the plank of the DSA platform that demands massive public investment to transition away from fossil fuels and public ownership over major transportation and energy infrastructure and natural resources. This is foolish. Voters understand that stringent carbon energy policy raises fuel prices and the cost of living. Most Democrats have backed away from the Green New Deal because voters want affordable energy. The socialists would force a growth-reducing green energy transition on a resentful public. A 2024 report by My American Enterprise Institute colleagues showed that 72% of Americans favor using both fossil fuels and renewables. The Pew Research Center reported in April that support for making wind and solar energy a priority had declined to 57% from 79% in 2020, while support for fossil fuel production shot up to 42% from 20%. Also on the upswing is support for nuclear energy, the one clean energy source that Mr. Sanders opposes. Democrats are the only group that has a positive image of socialism. According to Gallup, the public's positive image of capitalism has slipped to 54%, but 81% of Americans have a positive image of free enterprise. Only 39% of Americans and 38% of independents view socialism positively. DSA, the Democratic Socialist of America, is less popular than socialism itself. A recent Marquette Law School found that the group had a 21% favorable rating among registered voters. Half viewed the DSA unfavorably. Perhaps they read its platform. South Carolina Representative James Clyburn said that if Democrats are going to run on Medicare for all to fund the police, socialized medicine, we're not going to win. The lesson was brought home in 2024. What's changed? Not the president, not the country, but the Democrats themselves. They responded to Mr. Trump's reelection not with introspection, but with fury. You've been listening to the July 16th issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful weekend.